Welcome back. It's Scrawny with the Skinny. You're watching HLTV Fantasyland. Zywoo. Wow. Yai. $243,000 price tag, and it was still worth it. What a god. And what a great showing from Vitality. They top this group, they defeat FaZe in that last match, and they just look so solid, even with this stand-in inclusion of Jax. So it turns out this draft wasn't perfect. We finished top 12%. The Shamans still delivered. But of course, in the Jax to Apex debate, turns out Jax would have been the better choice. What a return to Tier 1 Counter-Strike from him, and what a great utilization of a role player like that by Apex. I'm also still happy with my Apex pick. You know, he had some very solid individual maps, and I think that point I made last week about Apex showing better risk assessment is still very valid. He's surviving more, he's killing more, and he's just proving to be less of a risk as of late. Unfortunately, in this draft, it turns out that Twists was the underperformer. Twists and Kerrigan finished the group, both qualifying to playoffs, of course, but they have the same rating. And any day that Kerrigan has the same rating as Twist, I'm going to be, very content with the Kerrigan pick. It didn't sink this ship, but Twists would have been better replaced by Brokey, Rops, or Rain. Not every day Twist underperforms like that, but this event was one where he didn't quite find his groove. And then Fiku. Well, it turns out that OG's bronze without a brain, man, this is a team who I think is in for some real trouble with the major cycle right around the corner. Their identity is now seemingly lost, and a lot of their games were incredibly sloppy. It was not the best CS, and it feels like Fiku and Neofrag ended up paying that price. Ultimately, it would have been a better pick to go for Config, but he's on a team that also didn't make playoffs. I've got to apologize. I read off the Brazilian teams as quickly as I did the Australians, and it turns out both end up making playoffs in Pain and 0-0 Nation. There was a moment last week where I paused on top of Coldzera, and I said, if anybody wants to draft this guy, make sure to bring it down to the comments. I don't remember seeing any, but it turns out Cold was well worth it. That third map versus NIP, he had an excellent showing, and I'm actually very happy that 0-0 Nation have given us a result and will be playing further throughout this season of Pro League. But let's get into it, okay? Shamans ended top 12%. Now we're talking ESL Pro League Group D. When I look at this opening round bracket, I have to say one half of it looks way more stacked than the other side. So I'll move quickly through the easy predictions, and I'll get into the games that I find interesting. Liquid versus Rare Atom, nothing to talk about here. Liquid will stomp. And then we have ENCE versus ATK, where even though I think ENCE's struggles in 2023 have been a very real red flag, ATK is not of the caliber to keep up, all right? I can sit here and talk smack about Aussies and Brazilians and Asian CS. Outside of Liquid and Complexity, NA sucks too. So, ATK, Rare Atom, those are the losses. Liquid, ENCE, upper semifinals, number 1. Spirit versus Astralis is where I think this one gets very interesting. We have an Astralis who started the year with a great showing at the Blast Groups, qualifying for Spring Final, going to Washington, and proving that the device comeback is very much on. Spirit are, I think, the contrast to that, because we didn't get to see Astralis in Katowice, so there's still a very small sample size. All they went on to do after that was, of course, play in some online games, qualify for the European RMR, and they've been owning in that regard, right? The 3 players of Buzz, that's right, Buzz, Device, and Blame F have all been well worth it for Astralis, but they're currently inflated because of those online results. And Spirit, well, I wish they had stopped playing after Katowice. They went on to accept an invite to the CCT Malta LAN Finals, where I had them painted to absolutely win that, right? They fell short of my expectations in Kato, but I figured they would go to the next LAN and clean up, and that was a weird LAN. Let's be honest, it's not Tier 1 organization. There was a weird schedule. It was an Eternal Fire versus Bad News Eagles Grand Finals. I don't know how much stock to put into it. But regardless, I don't think we've gotten Patsy showing up so far in 2023. And Wonderful's sometimes inconsistent results, I think, put a weird question mark around Spirit when it comes to them versus Astralis. Astralis have momentum, but they also have yet to play a regular amount of other Tier 1 teams. In this head-to-head, and this will be a theme, I think, throughout this episode of Fantasyland, I'm taking Astralis. I think Astralis defeat Spirit in the opening matchup and head into the upper semifinals. Then we have Navi versus Fours. Now, you can remember that Simple was very frustrated with Navi's end result in Kato. Their game versus Heroic didn't go their way. He said that players on his team shit their pants. I don't think that's going to happen here. We have to remember who they still beat in Kato, right? That was a BO3 victory over top of Cloud9, over top of eventual semifinalists of Team Liquid, and outsiders as well. And improved outsiders were defeated by Navi. The only losses that Navi had in Kato were versus G2 and Heroic, the two grand finalist teams. So I fully expect Navi to be bouncing back into Pro League, very hungry. It seems like this inclusion of NPL is starting to pay off, and I think that they can surpass the results that they were getting with Sumdai Young. I think the time for Navi's comeback is starting to brew here. So Astralis versus Navi in the other upper semifinal. I think Liquid dispatch of a currently plagued ENCE. The roster is just in flux. They're trying to include Nertz, who I do think will bring more to the server than Valda has, but it's still just a new team, so I'm not putting much stock in that. When Liquid play in the upper final, it will be versus Navi, and in that head-to-head, I'm going to take Liquid, just because NA bias. Could go either way, and recently did go the way of Navi. Astralis then go down into the lower semifinals, and I want it to be noted that there's an important game, a crux in this lower bracket, and that is the winner of Rare Atom ATK versus Unknown. They will play versus the loser of this lower match here. For that reason, I think Astralis actually get a very real chance at just farming lesser opposition, getting through with a bunch of points, and then moving into the lower final. I don't think Astralis' run will be clean, but I do expect them to still move through. So let's get into the draft, all right? Let's do it. All right. We're going to scroll down to the bottom. Straight away, cut out the fat. I will not be talking about Rare Atom. I will not be talking about ATK. I want to pause on Fours for a second. Much like I did 0-0 Nation last week with Coldzera. This is a team that during the CCT Malta event, I actually had painted as outdoing Bad News Eagles. I believe in the Zorte op. I believe in Shelfie's rifling, and I didn't know enough about Resalt to really justify it at the time. But Resalt is a curious case at 191,000. Unfortunately for Fours, they open up versus Navi, and then they play the loser of Spirit versus Astralis. So because Fours will more than likely begin this Pro League season 0-2, I'm not taking any risk or taking any player from these five, even though I just want to see them continue to play. I think there's still promise here, right? Young CIS players and a very explosive op in Zorte. We get to ENCE. Man, Nertz is one of the players whose price tag has come down. HLTV brought him back because he's been farming lesser teams. 211,000 is still too steep for an unknown quantity when it comes to tier 1 opposition. I think Diha and Sun Pius are reasonably priced. I think Madden's always in the 195s. And of course, Snappy. Oh, Snappy. You know you want to take the risk, but sometimes this guy sinks ships. He can be the worst player of your draft at a moment's notice. So I won't be touching ENCE either. I'm looking again for players and teams that are going to make it into the playoffs. And I think that the 4 playoff teams from Group D will be Astralis, Spirit, Navi, and of course Liquid. With that in mind, let's start at Liquid. My formula is going to be a 2-2-1. Liquid and Navi all the way through. The 2-2-1 paid off in Group C with Vitality and FaZe, and so I'm going to keep to that exact draft style. When we're drafting Team Liquid, I'm going for consistency. All right, this is a team like FaZe where I think between Naf, YEKINDAR, and Elige, you're not quite sure who may provide that carry. If these were playoff games, man, I maybe consider OC at 193. But the thing is the affordability right now between Liquid and Navi is insane. The 8 most drafted players for this draft are all on Liquid or Navi. All 8 of the top 8 drafted are on these two teams, just because the price tags are so affordable at the moment. Fixating in on Liquid, I'm going with Naf. And it's not Canadian bias. He is the highest rated player for the team so far in 2023. I think he is the guy on their CT sides who is going to hold bomb sites most consistently. And in terms of risk assessment, Naf just has it. He doesn't need to be in the fray, and yet he finds himself there. It's almost like the action comes to Naf. And when it does, constantly in the right position, constantly good for more than one kill, and constantly good for HLTV rating. So Naf is the first player from Liquid. Now, at a $211,000 price tag, both him and YEKINDAR are justifiable. You can afford both and still start tapping into the lesser priced Navi players, but man, he's been inconsistent in 2023. Straight up. He had a good match versus, I believe, Navi and Kato. Outside of that, this hasn't been the YEKINDAR of 2022. This hasn't been the revelation of an entry fragger. I think that his shtick is starting to get expected by opponents. And if there's one piece of Team Liquid that you can always expect, it's going to be YEKINDAR's style. Naf is where I'm going to get my CT side rating. And I want to tap into the T side rating. And if I can't get YEKINDAR or I don't want him, I'm looking at Elige. These are the two Liquid players I'm going to choose due to recency. All right, Naf, best player in 2023, and Elige, I think in Kato, showed incredible promise. I actually made a tweet about Grim being the #1 player from the United States of America at the moment, and I think that by the end of Kato, Elige made me start questioning that assessment. He's just so consistent. He's got it. And at 203, yes, YEKINDAR could be in front of him getting those multi-kills before Elige can farm. But the moment YEKINDAR goes down, the moment there's a lapse in YEKINDAR's performance, Elige is going to clean up. He's going to pick up that slack, and I think he's going to be very well worth it here, right? I don't want to get into the Nitro 178 because so many other players are affordable at the moment. I think this is a great draft to avoid the unknown of Nitro per se. So that's Liquid. We look at Navi. Now, Simple at 228, justifiable. If you think Simple is going to be another one of the top-rated players, if you think he is still contending for #1 of 2023, then you could go in on him here and now, right? This is the type of environment where I think Simple can shine. It's a studio LAN. He's going to have fun with it. But I'm still out on Simple right now this year. I think that with the rest of the players being as affordable as they are, every single one of Navi's other 4 are beneath $200,000. You can't ignore that. If I were to ask you who's going to end this group, assuming Simple goes God mode, who's going to end this group as the #2 and #3 players on Navi, I don't think you can answer any way other than Electronic and Bit. I think Electronic's T-side aggression is crazy. Versus lesser opposition, he will just break through. Sometimes that's a liability. Sometimes you watch him run at a 3-stack with a Mac 10 and you question, why the hell would I ever draft this guy? But at 198,000, with his current return to form, I can't pass on this duo. Electronic and Bit. Electronic and Bit. I want you to say these 4 names out loud. Naf, Elige, Electronic, and Bit. How can this draft fail? All right? Both of these Navi players are starting to come back into their form. Again, I think the replacement of SDY made things weird for a little while, but Bit has been Simple's #2, and Electronic has that promise in him. There's even a chance that one of these players surpasses Simple in the likes of a group stage. If it was playoffs, I'd put more money on Simple, but he is content with just letting these other players surpass him. Simple can take some edgy risks that could end up getting him killed, and I think that's where Electronic and Bit will clean up. So now we have our final draft, our 5th player of this puzzle. I'm not going beneath Ents. I won't do it. Snappy at 181, hyper aggressive. You know he's going to die a lot. You know when a push doesn't work, he just pushes faster. I don't like it. Especially considering that right now I'm banking on an Astralis playoffs performance, right? What I learned with Fiku last week was that it's better to grab a player from a team that's going to win. Now, NIP still lost, but it would have been better had I drafted Config. And when I think of these 3 players, I think that Snappy is the biggest risk, so I'm going to cut him out of this draft. And I have to choose now between Xyp9x and Glaive. Now, these are two fundamentally different players, I think, when it comes to Astralis. Because Xyp9x is very content riding coattails. All right? He's not a playmaker. He's the guy that's always last alive. He'll be there if you need him to clean up a site. Glaive in losses has a lower rated. But I think that Glaive has the potential to pop off on more maps, especially when we start to tap into that potential game versus the winner of Rare Atom versus ATK. And maybe that's too much for you to be comfortable with. Maybe you don't want to bank in on a could be, shoulda, woulda, coulda type environment. But I think that between Xyp9x and Glaive excites me more. All right? And that's why I watch Counter-Strike. That's why I play Fantasy, because I want to be watching this stream excited by the 5 players that I pick. And it's for that reason that even though I can afford him, even though this silver card looks real pleasing in comparison to this bronze rusty Glaive, I'm going to pick Glaive here. This is the 5. This is the Ghouls. All right, the Shamans finished top 12% last week. The Ghouls are a guaranteed top 5. Yeah, you heard it here first. All right, I've gone ahead and put leader on Nav because Liquid are simply going to win. Multi-fragger for Elige, especially versus the opening match of Rare Atom. Electronic on the entry frag just makes sense. And check this out, dude. Headshot machine. 75% activation right now on Headshot machine for Bit. Twist is sitting at like a 27 or 28% right now, right? We kind of reserve this role for certain individuals, and we always talk about how Twist gets headshots, but man, this is 2023. There is nobody as good at ripping off heads than Bit at the moment. So that's a no-brainer. And then when it comes down to Glaive, I've gone ahead and put him on support. You could have put him on defender. It's comparable between the two. And I don't think he's going to get support points because he's surviving rounds. I expect him to get support points because he'll be getting assists and he'll be getting traded. Again, a more active player. So this is it. This is the Ghouls. This is how you make top 5%. But Connor, the video's not over. What? Why is that? What? We're doing something new. Because there are options. There are options. And I want to go through some of those options for those of you who doubt these 5. If you decide to take your draft differently, let's talk about options. Device. I'm not saying that Astralis are going to get through to the playoffs cleanly. I don't think that they will beat Navi in that potential upper semifinal. But I do believe that regardless of Astralis' journey to playoffs, Device is going to farm. If Shiro was the #1 rated player of his group, if ZywOo was his in Group C, there is potential that Device goes star mode and can be right up there with them. And then him being in your draft will be well worth it. You're not going to get as many padding points as you would ZywOo or Shiro, because I don't anticipate them going through playoffs cleanly, but I do believe Device could still be a justifiable draft. It's a little bit risky. And again, I want to remind you that because of the online games, Astralis, all of their price tags are currently inflated. Three of them have actually been brought down by HLTV. Device, BlameF, and Buzz. They're all on discount technically. You know, if Device was like 215, 217, man, I don't think you could pass that up. But at 223, with the affordability of Liquid and Navi, it's just still hard to justify. So if you go this route, I still suggest getting Naf. He's the consistent piece of Liquid, and Nitro is how you will afford him, right? Liquid have an easy side of the bracket. They will not be beat by Ents. If they lose versus Navi in the finals, maybe Nitro gets you a little bit of negative points, but I still think he's moving smoothly through the first 2 best of 3s. Then you've got Bit and Perfecto. You have to sacrifice one of the 2 198,000 players and include Perfecto instead. You could just straight up take Perfecto in your draft, but I think that with Bit and Electronic being that affordable, I want both of them personally. If you have to replace one of the 2, I suggest replacing Electronic. I think he's a bit more of a loose cannon. He can have some off T sides if he is getting stuffed out by a particular defense. You know, that whole run-in with the MAC-10 thing, yeah, it's hit or miss. Whereas Bit, I just think that it's better to bank on him. So, I've got one more. If you don't want to pick Device, you could still pick Simple. Now, this is playing into the 2-2-1, right? The 2-2-1 strategy of Liquid, Navi, and question mark. And Simple at 228,000, if he is going to be a hard carry like Shiro and Zaiwu, which is very justifiable. We're talking about last year's #1 rated player. But I don't think Simple's going to bring it in this group stage particularly. I don't think it's worth that extra $28,000, $30,000 in fact, compared to Bit and Electronic. You have to take him with Perfecto, again, for affordability purposes. Naf and Nitro, that's the double from Liquid if you're not going for somebody like Elige. And I'm going to say Siren. I think that Spirit should still make playoffs. I think they'll show us an improvement since Malta. They've had a little bit of time off. They're going to kind of rework things. And Siren has shown that his skill ceiling is actually quite high. His inconsistencies are real, so it's a cautious pick, don't get me wrong. But because you take Perfecto in the 189, it does free up a little bit more money. If you don't want Siren and you want to play into Astralis, you could get somebody like Glaive or Zippix, and then yeah, okay, Perfecto could get replaced by Electronic or Bit. But I do think that Siren is a good potential off pick. You know, if you're not going to go Astralis as your alternative team, definitely go from somebody on the Spirit camp. I would suggest avoiding Ents. I just think there's a red flag on that team at the moment, and they've yet to prove me wrong. So these are the alternative options. But this is your solution. If you want a top 5 team guaranteed, no promises, no money back. Naf, Elige, Electronic, Bit, and Glaive. That's the ghouls. All right. The Shamans took us to the top 12%, and the ghouls are going to go even further. You heard it here first. And remember, rule number 2, get down to those comments and talk some shit. I'll see you guys in the next one.